And Rich called me and he said, now I know where my car is, we can go get it. And I go, well, you don't have a title to it. He goes, I do have a title to it. And as a matter of fact, I have the matching license plate that is in that magazine article. And I was like, oh, wow. All right, things are going to get deep here. Once again, obviously, if you see me, I'm probably going to tell a story about the Dukes of Hazzard. This is probably one of the wrap-up ones that I've never been able to tell. This one had a lot of legal issues and a lot of things that have been wrapped up within the last year. So it is now time to tell the story of the Wheelstand General Lee. During the 7 seasons of the Dukes of Hazzard, they destroyed 321 Dodge Chargers to play one General Lee, but they had, behind the scenes, built one at the shop where all the cars were built. And the 3 mechanics were Tom Sarmento, AJ Thrasher, and Rich Septon. And Rich Septon was a very, very good friend of mine. And when I first met Rich, he would take my phone call for no reason at all and talk Dukes of Hazzard with me. He was on a dialysis machine and he had plenty of time to talk. He enjoyed, reminiscing of this, that, and other, but over the time that we spent while he was on the machine, we became very, very good friends. And he was a school teacher and had a daughter, and of course, everybody, insert sticky divorce or bad divorce here or whatever else. But Rich was a very, very neat person. When he got a kidney transplant, he would invite me to come out to California, and he would show me where things happened on the Dukes of Hazzard. And that's how I got all this ridiculous knowledge, because I knew Bo, Luke, and Daisy didn't jump the cars. I knew they were stuntmen. I knew that Cooter didn't fix the cars. I knew they were mechanics. But I finally had found one person that would talk to me about the Dukes of Hazzard and explained everything. When we jumped my car, Rich Septon was super involved in all that stuff. But he told me this fantasy story about a General Lee that would stand up on 2 rear wheels, kind of like the little red wagon, the Dodge truck that did the same thing. He said that they had built a General Lee that was a wheel-standing General Lee. And when we would be out in California kicking around with him, and we'd go to Indian Dunes, that's where the Twilight Zone accident happened, and we went out to the old ranch and Values and Saga Speedway and all these places that you would see, from Sammy Hagar's I Can't Drive 55 video to Knight Rider to all this stuff kind of overlapped. But he liked to let me drive because I was from out of town, and he would literally sit in the back seat and just laugh at me, because he would be like, all right, go up here and turn left. And I would be like, on Tajunja Road? And he goes, Tahunga. And he would just laugh at me. And I didn't know how to say La Cienega and all this stuff, but he taught me all the roads, but it was tough love. And he was just the nicest guy in the world. So secretly, he had built a wheel-standing General Lee that Warner Brothers had no idea existed. And Warner Brothers took complete control of their cars for the last couple seasons. And so all of the mechanics had floated around, but they finally ended up at 7734 San Fernando. And that's where all the cars were built. And it's just outside the Bob Hope Airport. You used to be able to taxi down runway 1 and you'd see all the General Lees parked out in front. It was super cool. But secretly, behind the scenes, they were building this stand-up General Lee. And what they had done is they had taken a Dodge Charger as a unibody car. So they cut the whole bottom end out of the rear end of it. And then they made a frame, and they put a big block blown Chrysler on it. And then they had a regular transmission to a boat V-drive, and then it would send it back to the axle. So all of the weight and everything was over the axle. And then they put it back up in the car, and the whole front of the car was empty. And all it had was the radiator and how to plumb everything up front. And it worked. It was the worst place on earth to be, because you had this big block Chrysler right behind your head, and if the belt let go, you were minus your lid at that point. But it would go down and go on 2 wheels and skid down the drag strip. And so this madman, Rich Septon, had built this stand-up General Lee, and it was regular wheelbase, and you wouldn't know it was any different other than it had big tires on the rear end, and if you looked in, it had a big blown Chrysler in the back seat. He took it to the set and he presented it to the writers. And the writers were trying to figure out some way to write in this wheel-standing General Lee into the last season of the Dukes of Hazzard. And they had this delusions of grandeur, this big idea that they were going to wheel stand off into the sunset. And that was going to be the end of the Dukes of Hazzard. Hooray, good show, whatever. But they just couldn't hide enough of the modifications to make it work. When it was all over and the show wrapped, Rich still had this car. And it was orange, and it had the correct wheels on it, and it was known as the stand-up General Lee. And it was super cool, and it ended up in some magazines and some things like that. But then it disappeared because Rich went through a pretty difficult divorce, and he had lost the car to his ex-wife somehow, and they came and repossessed it or picked it up for court fees or something ridiculous. And he had fought it and fought it and fought it, and he had actually won. But by the time he had won, the car had already been sold, and it went up to Washington State. After that, Rich had no recourse on how to get the car back, and it just kind of went into the ways of that was then and this is now. There's no more stand-up General Lee. But about the same time as the first Fast and the Furious movie came out, there's a scene where Dominic Toretto pounds on the 70 Charger, and the front wheels come up off the ground. And Rich calls me and he goes, "Man, that looks like my old car." And I said, "No, Rich," I said, "they had these wheels and the pneumatic things on the bottom. They made it happen, and it was not your car." But then that gained interest or sparked interest in what happened to the stand-up General Lee, this wheel-standing 1969 Dodge Charger. And somehow the current owners up in Washington called Mopar Collector's Guide and said, "Hey, we have the stand-up General Lee." And it was all just, the stars aligned. It was so weird. And they printed one 2-page article about the thing, and it still looked relatively fine. Nothing had been done to it. It just was a little disrepair, but nothing that couldn't have been undone. It had a California license plate on it still. And Rich called me, and he said, "Now I know where my car is. We can go get it." And I go, "Well, you don't have a title to it." He goes, "I do have a title to it. And as a matter of fact, I have the matching license plate that is in that magazine article." And I was like, "Oh, wow. All right, things are going to get deep here." So those people were contacted through Mopar Collector's Guide, and they were invited to come out to a Dukes of Hazzard event in Virginia. And along the way, they were going to stop in Indianapolis, where I live, and be a part of their road trip and then continue on. Well, Rich knew that they were going to stop in Indianapolis. And I really don't remember how all this went down, but I was there when it did. Rich showed up about 4 days ahead of time with his daughter, Amanda, and they were excited about finally getting back the wheel-standing General Lee. They have the title. They have the matching license plate to the one that's on it. It is legally his car, and he just lost it in a bad deal. They hired a repossession company, and the state of Indiana put a repo ticket out for this car. And I was like, man, this is serious. The folks came into town with the car in an enclosed trailer, and they had it all staked out, and the repo company was ready to go. And for some reason, the gentleman that had dropped the trailer and either went to eat or something, and the repo company was on it. And they grabbed the trailer, pulled it forward, rolled the wheel stander out, shut the lid, put the trailer back where it was to go, put it on the rollback truck, and were gone in 5 minutes or less. Like, it was ridiculous. And I was watching all this from across the street, and this has been, 15 years ago. And I'm like going, did that really just happen? It was weird the next day because when the sun came up, Rich called me and he said, "Will you meet me at the repo lot?" And I really didn't know he was in town. He had kind of orchestrated a lot of this himself. And I drove over. It wasn't too terribly far from the house. And he was literally out there with his hand on the car, like it was good to see an old friend, and he had his car back. I was like, man, you should really make sure you clean up all the paperwork on it and make sure that it's 100% legit. Everything's good. So he took off back to California with his car. And he literally came to Indianapolis with a Jeep Cherokee, bought a trailer here in Indy, and left and went with the wheel-standing General Lee. Well, needless to say, the people from Washington were pissed, and they had a title too, but their title was backdated or was dated after the other title. It was bad. So the judge that ordered the repossession in Indianapolis was then overruled by a judge that had ordered another repossession out of Washington State, where these people were from. Rich had then called me to get the correct wheels for the back, and we had them widened, and he had done a ton of work to the car, and he got it functional again to where it would pick up the front end again. So after 15, 16 years, the car's back. He's able to display it. The guy who built the car got his car back after this nasty divorce. And I was still that guy, like, maybe you should double check and make sure everything's good and get a current California title and everything. He goes, no, I got my title, whatever. I'm like, should have listened to Travis. So Rich started going to the Dukes of Hazzard events with this thing, and it was really neat to see the car. And actually, when I jumped the car, he brought the wheel stander with him there for that. And it was the first time the wheel stander had been in public, and it was awesome. And it got it started and running and picking whatever. It was incredible. The next year, another Dukes event comes around, and he's decided to take the wheel stander there again. And that was in Tennessee. And Tennessee had a court order to repossess the car. So when he got there, he was guaranteed that it was going to be safe by the promoter, and the promoter could do nothing when the Tennessee State Police showed up and repossessed the car again on behalf of the folks from the order that was out of Washington State. So now Rich has lost the car again. And he had all these beautiful stand-up General Lee posters made and all this, and he's living the high life because he was the guy who built all the cars in the show, and now he's got his baby back, and he's sharing this with his daughter and his family and all this stuff, and that's gone. Years go by, and Rich has passed away, and it kind of went quiet, and I haven't really talked about it. It's really weird to even sit here and talk about it now. I get a call from Brian Grams at the Volo Auto Museum up in Illinois, and Brian says, what do you know about the stand-up General Lee? And if there's never a better curator for star cars other than Scott Velvet in Branson, Missouri, Brian Grams is equally incredible, and he cares about star cars as much as I do. He goes, what do you know about the stand-up General Lee? And I'm like, ooh, man, that thing's got yucky titles. Stay away from it with a 20-foot pole. Like, do not get near this thing. I said, why? He said, the people that own it in Washington would like to sell it to me. And I'm like, all right, well, as long as it's not some middleman or whatever else. I sent him all the photos I had on it and all the information I had on it. And I said, you should probably really contact Amanda Septon, who is Rich's daughter, because she was in line to get the car once, before it got repossessed, after it got repossessed. Brian reached out to Amanda Septon and said, do you care if I become the new curator of your father's car? And she gave him her blessing. And that was super cool because she lives close now. Apparently she's no longer in California. The people came down, they came to a deal. Brian sent a truck up to pick it up in Washington State and brought it back. And now the stand-up General Lee, after all of these years and being hidden away in storage units and people's houses, the wheel standing car that was supposed to send Bo and Luke off into the sunset can now be seen in Illinois at the Volo Auto Museum. And it has Amanda Septon, Rich's daughter's blessings, and they actually are making display on behalf of her father. So what was really a bad story all the way from the inception of the car to getting taken from the divorce is finally one of the last pretty real General Lees. I mean, it was made with real parts. And so if you ever want to see the car, it's now at the Volo Auto Museum. And it's really kind of cool. I mean, if I got a pretty good kick to my voice, it's good to see that car come back around.
When you get a ticket, no matter where it happens, it's more important than ever to fight every one. And the perfect partner in that fight is the Ticket Clinic. When you get a ticket, you're facing costly insurance premium increases, points on your license, fines, risk of suspension, jail time, and they can help you avoid all of that. They've got offices in Florida and in California, but they can help you fight a ticket through their network of attorneys no matter where in the United States you get one. You can text a picture of your ticket to 305-305, or you can check them out now at the link in the description below. So thank them for their support of VINwiki, of Car Trek, and fight your ticket with the Ticket Clinic.